In October 1847, the two leaders of the God-worshipping society, Hong Xiuquan and Feng Yunshan, as well as another god-worshipper by the name of Lu Liu, set out to destroy a shrine to a prominent local spirit as part of their campaign to rid China of all demon worship. Upon reaching the shrine, Hong proceeded to shout abuse at the offending idol, before knocking it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. They then desecrated the shrine by painting poems all over the walls, as well as a proclamation denouncing the vanquished spirit, which Hong signed using the name Taiping Tianwang, or Taiping Heavenly King. This act greatly enhanced Hong's and Feng's reputations, drawing many new converts to their cause. However, it also attracted a lot of negative attention, not least from a wealthy member of the local scholar elite by the name of Wang Soxin. Wang reported the incident to the local magistrate, but the magistrate refused to take action, as doing so would undermine the image of peace and prosperity that he had painted for his superiors. So Wang decided to take matters into his own hands. He sent men into the Thistle Mountains, the heartland of the god-worshipping society. There they arrested Feng, holding him prisoner in a local temple. In response, Lu Liu and a group of god-worshippers set Feng free. However, Wang simply gathered more men and tried again, this time taking both Feng and Lu Liu into custody. Whilst imprisoned, the two men were poorly treated, and shortly after their arrest, Lu Liu died, giving the god-worshippers their first martyr. Desperate to secure Feng's freedom, the god-worshipping society began collecting money from amongst their members and used it to bribe the local magistrate into releasing Feng, on the condition that he returned to his native village in the province of Guangdong. In the meantime, Hong had travelled to Guangzhou to appeal to the Governor-General of Guangdong and Guangxi in a futile bid to secure Feng's release. With both Hong and Feng away from the Thistle Mountains, a new leader would step forward, one whose boundless ambition would have dramatic consequences for the future of the Taiping movement. As the year 1847 drew to a close, the ranks of the god-worshipping society continued to grow at a steady rate. Whereas in its earliest days, most god-worshippers had come from lower-class professions such as farming or mining, now the movement was beginning to attract people from other walks of life, such as merchants or educated men who were yet to find success within the system of imperial examinations. Crucially, the movement also started to draw in wealthy families. One such example were the Xiuquan, who were one of the richest families in the area. Amongst the ranks of the Shi was a particularly talented individual by the name of Shi Dakai. Though still a teenager, Shi Dakai had already earned himself a reputation for being an educated and capable young man with a noble character. Shi first encountered Hong as a 16-year-old and made a great impression on the older man. The following year, the Shi clan suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of one of Guangxi's indigenous ethnic groups and sought protection from the god-worshippers. Shi Dakai would quickly assume a position of leadership within the movement, becoming one of Hong's most capable and devoted lieutenants. Another well-off family that was brought into the fold was the Weis of Jian, a small town in the foothills of the Thistle Mountains. Despite their wealth, the Weis had long been denied social prestige due to the fact that one of their distant ancestors had belonged to an indigenous ethnic group. This sense of being unfairly excluded was a great source of frustration for one young member of the clan by the name of Wei Changhui. In a bid to bestow some prestige upon his family, the young Wei had purchased a government title for his elderly father, which he'd had carved into a tablet to be hung outside the entrance to their home. Unfortunately, some of the local elites took offence to this and had a group of thugs steal the tablet, which they offered back to Wei in exchange for a large ransom. Eager to recover the stolen tablet, Wei sought assistance from the one group who he knew the local elites couldn't influence, that being the God-worshipping society. Feng Yunshan immediately agreed to help and went with Wei to negotiate for the tablet's return. However, their efforts to negotiate met with ridicule, so Feng came back with some of his God-worshipper friends and stole the village's entire grain supply. By this point, Wei was sufficiently impressed by Feng and his cause that he persuaded his entire family to join the God-worshipping society, bringing their wealth with them. The examples of Shida Kai and Wei Changhui illustrate two important reasons why people were joining the God-worshippers, namely mutual protection and frustration at being exploited by corrupt officials and bandits. However, the fact that these two men became so devoted to the cause, became true believers in Hong's spiritual mission, speaks to the fact that the God-worshippers' message resonated with people. One of the reasons for this was that the God-worshippers weren't necessarily about adopting something new, but rather recovering something old. Their God, the Heavenly Father, was identified with Shangdi, the title afforded to the highest god in ancient Chinese theology. Yes, Shangdi happened to be the same god that the Western Christians worshipped, but that was because the Christians also worshipped Shangdi, rather than some foreign deity that had never enjoyed a mass following in China. In a way, this was no accident. Both Jesuits and Protestant missionaries had been deliberately equating the Christian god with Shangdi for well over 200 years. An unintended consequence of this strategy was that it allowed the god worshippers to construct a deity the Western missionaries wouldn't have recognised. Indeed, they probably would have found it deeply heretical. For instance, whereas the Christian god was immaterial and thus invisible, the Heavenly Father Shangdi was very much visible to those who had ascended to heaven, as Hong could personally attest. What's more, as far as the god worshippers were concerned, Shangdi and Jesus weren't two parts of a trinity, but rather distinct entities, as they had appeared to Hong during his time in heaven. Together with Shangdi, Jesus and Hong made up a heavenly family, along with their mother, their wives and their children. Yet Jesus and Hong were not divine. To say that they were would be to usurp the title of the Heavenly Father Shangdi, and was therefore blasphemy. Much in the same way that God and Shangdi were understood to be one and the same, the god worshippers also identified the character of Satan with Yan Luo Wang, the ruler of hell in Chinese mythology, who Hong claimed had once assumed the form of a snake in order to trick Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Chinese religious ideas were also found in some of the practices which the god worshippers adopted, as evidenced by the outbreak of spirit channeling in Guangxi that occurred during the time of Hong and Feng's absence. The first and most important of these supposed mediums was a young charcoal burner named Yang Su-ching. Yang came from a background of severe poverty. An orphan from a young age, Yang had never received the education of men like Hong and Feng, and was mostly illiterate, though what he lacked in education he more than made up for in intelligence and charisma. Yang had emerged as a leader of the workmen in his local area while still in his early 20s, and his decision to join the god worshippers had done much to convince others to follow suit. In the spring of 1848, Yang announced that he had experienced a trance in which the Heavenly Father had taken possession of his body. This revelation was followed by more stories of supernatural encounters. Whilst at prayer, men and women started collapsing to the ground in fits of ecstasy, uttering prophecies and exhortations, or else speaking incomprehensible words. Others claimed to have seen visions of heaven, where they were allowed to see the Heavenly Father Shangdi and the Demon King Yan Luo, as Hong had seen them 11 years previously. Upon his return to Guangxi, Hong investigated Yang's claims, and declared them to be genuine, acknowledging Yang's trances as the Heavenly Father communicating his wishes to those on earth. Hong scrutinised the other supposed mediums, accepting some and dismissing others as having fallen under the influence of a corrupt spirit. Amongst those who received Hong's endorsement was Xiuquan, who claimed to be the mouthpiece for the elder brother Jesus Christ. Before joining the god worshippers, Xiao had worked as a farmer. Like Yang, Xiao was barely literate, though he was renowned for his courage and physical strength. By recognising these two men as heavenly mouthpieces, Hong enabled Yang and Xiao to effectively outrank him when speaking as the Heavenly Father and Jesus respectively. Why exactly Hong did this is hard to pin down. An often heard explanation is that Yang and Xiao assumed the leadership of the god worshippers whilst Hong and Feng were away, leaving Hong with no choice but to recognise these potential usurpers or risk splitting the movement. Personally, I don't find this convincing. Though the exact sequence of events is difficult to reconstruct, the sources do indicate that Hong returned to Guangxi only a few months after Yang's first trance. This would give Yang very little time in which to build up a power base large enough to threaten the man believed to be the literal son of the Heavenly Father Shangdi. What's more, both Yang and Xiao were confined to the area west of Guiping. It therefore seems highly unlikely that they would have been able to assert any sort of authority over the god worshippers in the Thistle Mountains, over 30 miles away. I doubt a wealthy and respected man like Wei Changhui would pay reverence to two illiterate labourers he'd never even met, unless instructed to by Hong or Feng. That leaves us with two possible explanations. The first is that Hong genuinely believed Yang and Xiao were heavenly mouthpieces. Modern historians tend to agree that Hong was convinced of his spiritual mission, and so, if Yang's and Xiao's utterances as the Heavenly Father and Jesus aligned with Hong's own understanding, it's not unreasonable to suggest that he took them at face value. Alternatively, Hong could have recognised Yang and Xiao for more pragmatic reasons. The practice of spirit channeling was very popular amongst ordinary people in southern China. Perhaps Hong saw Yang's and Xiao's performances as a way of attracting more converts to his cause. Either way, what matters is that, by endorsing Yang and Xiao, Hong granted them both positions of high standing within the movement. The god worshippers' leadership was established with the swearing of an oath of brotherhood, comprising Jesus, Hong, Feng, Yang, Xiao, Wei, and Shi. Each man pledged to one another and to the overthrow of the Qing. By the summer of 1849, all of these sworn brothers, save for Jesus, were back in Guangxi, where the situation was becoming more and more perilous by the day. Intensified efforts by the British Navy to rid the South China Sea of piracy had forced more pirate bands inland, where they took control of Guangxi's rivers. Meanwhile, the area had also seen a number of uprisings by groups of bandits affiliated with the Tiandihui, or Heaven and Earth Society in English. Add to this the ever-present threat of ethnic violence, and it's no surprise that thousands of Guangxi's Hakka population sought refuge within the mostly Hakka god-worshipping society. Of course, joining the society came with its share of sacrifices. God worshippers were expected to hand over all their money and valuables to the common treasury on pain of death, whilst their ideas around moral discipline led to a policy of keeping men and women completely separate, even married couples, with the punishment for trying to get around this again being death. It's therefore a testament to just how insecure Guangxi had become that many hackers felt that this was a price worth paying. In the meantime, the god worshippers faced continued harassment from the local elites. Several of them were arrested and imprisoned, with some even dying whilst in custody. It was most likely around this time that Hong and his followers began to identify the Qing and the Manchu ethnic group to which they belonged as demon devils, the main antagonists in their spiritual mission. What this meant was that, from now on, Hong's mission to wipe out the demonic forces on Earth included a heavenly ordained objective to exterminate the Manchus as a people. Not just overthrowing, but exterminating. Today this would be considered genocidal. Of all the Manchus in China, the god worshippers held the greatest contempt for the new Qing emperor, Xianfeng, who had ascended to the throne in March of 1850. Not only did they accuse the emperor and his predecessors of having led the Chinese people down a path of demon worship, but Hong and his followers charged the emperor with having committed a most egregious blasphemy. You see, the word emperor is a translation of the Chinese title Huangdi, which was made up of these two characters. And now, here's the title afforded to the Heavenly Father, Shangdi. Notice anything in common? According to Hong, the character Di, which can be translated as both Lord and God, was to be used by the Heavenly Father and no one else. Not Hong, not Jesus, and certainly not the Qing Emperor. Of course, the Xianfeng Emperor was not alone in his blasphemy. By extension, every Chinese emperor to have claimed that title over the previous 2,000 years was just as guilty. The very existence of the imperial office was an insult to the Heavenly Father, an insult that could not be allowed to go unpunished. It is here that we begin to see the revolutionary implications of the god worshippers' belief system. They weren't just about overthrowing the existing regime, they wanted to overthrow the entire imperial order. During the year 1850, the god worshippers intensified their preparations for this revolution. In the village of Jian, the Wei family began buying up large quantities of metal, which they claimed were to be used to make farming equipment. They instead began to covertly manufacture knives, swords, spears, and so on, turning their home into a makeshift weapons factory. They even kept a large flock of geese next to their home, so that their honks would mask the sound of hammers hitting anvils. Completed weapons were then hidden in a nearby pond, to be retrieved when the time came. In October 1850, Hong and Feng sent out a mobilization order, calling on all god worshippers to congregate at Jintian and prepare for action. Upon arrival, those able to fight were organized into a military structure drawn up by Feng Yunshan. At the lowest level, soldiers were organized into groups of 4. 4 soldiers were to be overseen by a corporal, 5 corporals by a sergeant, 4 sergeants by a lieutenant, 5 lieutenants by a captain, 5 captains by a colonel, and finally, 5 colonels were overseen by a division commander, giving each division 13,155 soldiers when at full strength. Each officer from sergeant upwards was identifiable by a unique flag, distinguishable by its colour, size and markings, which would have made a marching army quite the spectacle. As the god worshippers at Jintian were undergoing their military preparations, word of the lawlessness in Guangxi had reached the Xianfeng Emperor. In response, the emperor ordered several thousand troops from the neighbouring province of Guizhou to march south to help the Qing forces already in Guangxi restore order. Having reached Guangxi, a detachment of these soldiers was sent to the town of Xiuquan, with orders to subdue a band of religious rebels who were known to have been active in that area. However, when they arrived at Xiuquan, they heard that an even larger group of rebels had gathered around the village of Huazhou and moved to encircle them. Little did they know, this group included Hong Xiuquan and Feng Yunshan, the spiritual and organisational leaders of a rebel force numbering somewhere around 20,000. Lacking the numbers to force their way out, Hong and Feng had messengers slip through the enemy lines and carry word of the siege to Jintian. The god worshippers in Jintian quickly assembled a force and sent it to Huazhou, where they routed the Qing soldiers. Hong and Feng returned to Jintian in triumph. However, word soon came that a much larger Qing force was heading their way. The god worshippers' army was about to face its first real test. On the 31st of December 1850, the Qing army crossed a nearby river and established a command centre 5 miles outside of Jian. In response, around 20,000 god worshippers took up defensive positions to the east of the village, with Yang Suqing commanding the left, Xiao Gui commanding the right, and Hong and Feng commanding the centre. Both sides remained in position as night fell. The following day, the Qing commander gave the order to advance. Their objective was to force their way through the god worshippers' centre. The two armies came into contact and set about hacking, slashing and stabbing at their opponents. The fighting was fierce. Both sides suffered losses. With the Qing tied up in the centre, Yang and Xiao moved in from the sides. Outflanked, the Qing began to crumble and were soon in full retreat. Whilst trying to escape, the Qing commander who had been leading the assault fell off his horse and was set upon by god worshippers, eager to spill the blood of the demon general. The god worshippers had their first victory, but their position was by no means secure. The defeat at Jintian awakened the Qing to the threat the god worshippers posed. Soldiers who had been elsewhere in Guangxi dealing with pirates and bandits now moved to support the Qing soldiers already in the area, who had regrouped to the south. All the while, the food supply in the god worshippers' camp was running dangerously low. The 11th of January 1851 was Hong Xiuquan's birthday. In Jintian, a special ceremony was held, in which Hong declared that he had formally adopted the title of Heavenly King, establishing the Taiping Tianguo, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. Now there would be no turning back. The Taiping Rebellion had begun.